Hello again, everybody. Welcome to another edition of The App. Has nothing to do with computers. It stands for ARKLATEX People and Politics. And our special guest today, we're privileged to have you, Tim Temple. He is the Insurance Commissioner for the state of Louisiana. Welcome.
Glad to be here today. Thank you.
I know you just made the long drive from Baton Rouge up to Shreveport.
Just arrived.
And tell us why you're here.
Yeah, this afternoon I'll be speaking to the Senate Republican caucus or delegation members.
Okay.
And looking forward to that. Should be taking place here in about an hour.
Well, and then we have a couple weeks out from the start of a brand new legislative session, and I would assume that insurance is going to be probably pretty high on the agenda.
Well, look, it's high on the agenda for every citizen and every business I speak to throughout the state. So it certainly should be, if not, but I think that you're going to see and hear a lot about insurance this session.
Well, let's jump back to last fall a little bit. And there was a special session on taxes, but insurance reform did come up during that session. There's been a series of bills that were passed. They were your bills and other people's bills that led to some pretty good work on the homeowner side, right? Take us back through that a little bit.
Yeah, and first, Jeff, I would just want to, one thing I want to say is that, I have been adamant that we have a special session to address insurance crisis. This is the deepest insurance crisis our state has ever experienced, and specifically to auto insurance, which we all deal with, and I think we've gotten somewhat numb to the price of it on our personal insurance. It's still the highest. Technically, you could say Florida's maybe $40 higher using average premiums, but to the citizens of Louisiana, it's the highest. But we
don't want to get numb to it, right?
And we don't want to. Well, that's exactly. We don't want to get numb to it, but we have. But I think we're really feeling the pressure and hearing the most angst is from the commercial auto. In a city like Shreveport, Bossier, you've got a lot of commercial trucking here. You got a lot of vehicles that service the oil and gas industry here. Right. The gentleman that comes out to your home, whether he's driving a plumbing truck or a heating and air truck, that's commercial trucking, and all of the people in that business are suffering. And so I've been adamant that we have a special session because the legislature has been fighting this battle for 40 years, I'm told. Yeah. And they haven't gotten where we need to be. So we did have a special session, and I say we, the legislature, on taxation. They had one on criminal justice reform. I think the citizens of Louisiana deserve it. We haven't gotten it yet. I'm not going to give up calling for it. But until then, let's talk about what we have accomplished. Last year during the regular session, we had a package of bills. It was, it labeled the commissioner's bills, if you will, but it was insurance bills, and they weren't just my bills because I can't carry legislation. But I certainly worked with a handful of legislators and the governor to promote a package of bills designed to address the property crisis in the state. And I can tell you that those bills, were passed last year, and they are starting to make a difference. People are starting to see a flattening of the increases that we've been experiencing over the last several years. And this year we've had several companies have filed rate decreases on on residential property. So people can expect to start to see that in the coming year.
So there's still increases, but they're smaller.
They're smaller, right. And like any curve, you got to start to bend it down before it dips below.
And so my understanding is there's 10 new property carriers in the state?
Well, what we have is we've got 10 new companies that were writing some other lines of business. It may have been auto, it may have been workers' compensation, there's other lines that they were writing that have filed to write property, residential property. Doesn't mean they're writing today. I don't want to sit here and make you or your listeners and lead you down a false path that they're writing today. But the fact that they have filed the policy forms, they're filing the rates to be able to offer that is a good indication. I mean, you don't go through that process just to do it. You do it with the intent of selling policies. So it shows that the reform that we passed was needed and is having a positive influence and impact on the market.
And when you say they file, so speak to that just a little bit in the sense that these companies don't just get to do what they want to do. They have to pass that through your office, right?
That's correct. I mean, we are I am the regulator of the industry, which means we hold companies accountable to the laws that the legislature passes. And part of that is that the policy language has to be approved. They can't just come in and say that we want to, that they're going to cover something with a lot of limitations that may not be good for the consumer. It has to be approved by the Department of Insurance. So the policy forms as well as the rates. They have to submit and justify why they charge. And we've had some conversations in some hearings about that. You're probably going to hear a lot about that in the upcoming session.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we set an environment so that companies can come in and compete, and that that you put them in an environment where it's stable and predictable. Those are some of the best ingredients for any business, and we want insurance to be one of those.
And I think just like on the national scene with President Trump, and he's talking about cutting regulations, making it a freer and more open marketplace, that's kind of your goal too, right, for the insurance marketplace here in Louisiana.
And I've been saying that since day one. I am a free market capitalist. I believe that you set the conditions and you let the market compete against each other, and the consumers always benefit. Louisiana is our economy has the potential to grow and expand unlike I think any other period in our state's history because of some of the other reforms that have been passed in Baton Rouge by the governor and the legislature. But insurance is that anchor holding the ship, the economic ship back. The sails have got a lot of wind in them, but we've still got this anchor called insurance, and we've got to lift that anchor.
Yeah, well, nobody can function without it. You have to have it, right? I mean, you can't avoid it.
You have to have it. And the other thing is, it's an industry that gets beat up on a lot, and I understand people, if you think about it, if you're dealing with your insurance company, that means you've had a claim.
Sure.
You're either paying your premium, which you don't like,
of course not,
or you're filing a claim.
Yeah.
And so just by that very nature, people don't tend to have a good, positive relationship. But on the other side of that coin is when you have that claim, when it does work, when they send that adjuster out timely, when they pay you the amount that you're owed. I mean, that's normally, when you're filing that claim, it's for a lot of people, it's the worst day they've had.
Yeah, that's true.
That vehicle that they rely on to get to work and earn money and feed their family is damaged. They need that to be repaired. And so most of the time, insurance works the way it's intended. We tend to hear about when it doesn't work well.
Yeah, I can tell you from personal experience, I recently was in a pretty bad car accident, and my car was totaled. I didn't get hurt too bad, which was
good to hear.
Kind of a miracle. But I will say this: the insurance company, as you say, did function the way it was supposed to do. They did it in a pretty timely fashion. I had no complaints. So thank you.
Well, no, it's not me, but that's what we want to encourage and promote. I want companies to come in and take care of the citizens the way they expect it to be taken care of. You pay good money when you write that premium check. You expect the company to come in and take care of you. And that's, as a regulator, that's also a charge. I want to set the market conditions where insurance is affordable, but also hold the insurance companies accountable to take care of the consumers the way that they need to be taken care of.
Well, what kind of things on the regulatory side are you trying to do to make it freer and more open?
Yeah, well, we have worked from a regulatory standpoint on working with industry, working with adjusters, working with insurance agents to understand where, I call it transactional friction, where, there's just not an economy. I mean, nobody wants to deal with a regulator, no matter whether we're talking about insurance or, farmers or, the oil and gas industry. Nobody wants to, be overburdened by regulation. Right. You need to take care of the citizens, but at the same time, you don't want it to slow it down. So, when I became commissioner last year, I sat down with all of the deputy commissioners and just asked, what do you need more of? What do you need less of to do your job efficiently and effectively? And internally, we came up with a lot of things. We work with the industry when they see a problem internally. And I think most recently we had a company that was identified that had overcharged over 100,000 policyholders here in the state because of just using the wrong number. It was human error on their side inputting that. We discovered it. We immediately contacted the company, and within just 2 weeks, we had a solution laid out how to get premium returned to the consumers. And there are consumers out there today that are receiving checks, money back. But we didn't want to burden it with a heavy regulatory. I tell my people, I want the Department of Insurance to move at the speed of business, not at the speed of government.
That's a pretty wise decision, I would say. Sometimes I think government moves at the speed of mud. So you mentioned a little bit ago, and I've read in some of the material you've released about the things going on in the state of Florida. Talk about that a little bit and how that might apply to Louisiana.
Yeah, and I was just recently with most of my fellow commissioners at the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. We just had a conference, and I was with the Commissioner Jaworski from Florida, and his state suffered similar to Louisiana. We had Laura, Delta, Zeta, and Ida, and then they had Hurricane Ian.
Yeah.
One hurricane, but and they had a lot of destruction, a lot of claims, a lot of inefficiencies in companies that just didn't perform the way they needed to, and they had substantial, and they also had a lot of litigation, unnecessary litigation. And one stat which stands out with those hurricanes, all those claims that resulted from that hurricane in Florida, they had 7% of all of the claims in the country, yet they had 83 or 84% of all of the litigation filed in the country.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And it was an eye-opener to the leadership of the state of Florida. And they said, we have got to do something about that. So they held several special sessions to rebalance the system. Insurance, and I've been thinking about this a lot, and I'm not going to say it's a perfect, but insurance is complex. We all know it is, and most of us don't want to understand the complexities of it. We just want to be able to afford the check and have our claim paid when we have one.
That's it.
But insurance is complex, and I've been trying to work on how do you simplify just the basic concepts. And one core concept is that insurance claims, the premium of many pay for the claims of few.
Yep. Sure.
But when you start having more people having claims, then that becomes an imbalance. The other part of that is that, insurance is designed to pay you and make you whole.
Right.
And that's based on, and the premium is set on, obviously you've got actuarial studies, but it's basically modeling.
Yeah.
If I write your vehicle and you get in a wreck, how much do does the insurance company think it's going to cost to repair your vehicle and pay some reasonable bodily injuries? In Louisiana, we're an outlier. We have twice the national average of bodily injuries claim, over twice. Yeah. Some studies now say we're 3 times.
Wow.
But we also are over twice the national average to litigate.
Okay.
And again, insurance, they'll take these models and they say, okay, if we write, Jeff, for $100, what is the outcome? What is the likelihood of us paying more than $100 or keeping some of that $100? And anytime it's more than, then the next year they write you, they've got to write more than $100, and premiums go up. And so we've got to get serious about what drives the cost of those claims in Louisiana. It's the overutilization of medical, and it's the over litigation in our state.
And so that's where we always hear the term tort reform. We need tort reform. That's where that comes in, right?
And tort, I don't like tort reform because most of the viewers don't know what tort reform is, but I do think they know what legal reform is. Yeah. Look, we'll even call it insurance reform. I don't want to pick on the attorneys. There are certainly many that serve a needed role and function in our economy. Yeah. But so let's don't pick on the attorneys. Let's call it insurance reform.
Okay. So what, in your opinion, what are some of the things that need to be done to create the needed reform?
Yeah. Well, like I said, we need to look at what those drivers are. And one of it is bodily injury. Why do we, our cars have all of the safety devices, just like I'm sure yours did. We've got, seat belts and airbags and anti-lock brakes and sensors and just like all the other vehicles. And so the question is why, when we're involved, a Louisiana, your average person is involved in a wreck in our state, why do they claim a bodily injury more than, that's the first question. And the second is why do we litigate twice?
Okay.
I think it's pretty obvious to a lot of people. If you've driven any of our highways and you've listened to the radio ads and watched some TV ads, you know what drives that behavior.
You got attorneys saying, I can get you this, I can get you that, let's sue.
Right. And it's, the common phrase is get in a wreck, get a check.
Yeah.
And look, like I said, I want you to be made whole. If you have been involved in an accident and again, your car's been damaged, you've got legitimate medical expenses, that's what insurance is designed to compensate you for. It's when you get more than that, the system starts to break down. And so we've got to have some serious conversations around and rebalance. I've never advocated that we need to, run attorneys out of this state or fire any of them, but we've got to rebalance and get it back where people get what they're owed, not more than what they're owed.
Are the attorneys, are they getting involved in any of these discussions with you, or are they helping you to, or not? I mean,
Look, I would
you
love,
wish?
I would love to sit down, and
Yeah.
I've said that at several committee hearings. You know, I'd love to sit down and one-on-one and have some frank conversations. But I mean, I would not be truthful if I told you that's taken place.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. That might be helpful, right?
I think it would be very helpful.
Talk to me about this, and again, we heard this a lot last year during the special session. Collateral source. That was a bill that was carried by Michael Mellery from up here in Shreveport, state representative.
Local House member.
And we heard this is a good thing. We heard this is a good thing. I did several interviews with Michael about it. To be honest with you, I'm not sure I still understand it. I know it has to do with something about what's billed and what's paid, but I break down from there. Can you kind of go through that? Tell us why it's a good thing, and what happened?
Yeah, and look, we'll preface: I'm not an attorney,
Right.
but it is a legal concept, if you will. But collateral source, and we've started saying transparency and medical billing because I think that more accurately describes for just the average layperson what we're talking about.
Sure.
I know a lot of plaintiff attorneys are saying, oh, they're changing it because they don't like whatever. They're making they'll make their battle on why it's the name change. But I want people to understand what it is, and a lot of people have collectively said, you know what, let's refer to as transparency and medical billing.
Okay.
So when that, and let's use your scenario, that accident you were in.
Yeah.
Had you received some bodily injury and you had gone and received medical treatment, you have health insurance.
All right.
You would use your health insurance. And at the end of that, and we all get that statement. We've seen it,
Sure.
In the mail when we've gone to a doctor, had something, we say, what was billed.
Yeah.
And then there's a column because we had health insurance, and
Right.
there's a negotiated rate, a
Right.
negotiated savings. Then there's what was paid. And then sometimes we may have what we owe, a copay or something like that.
Right.
But let's focus on what was billed and what was paid.
Okay.
I don't know, they're never the same.
No.
Or if they are, I haven't seen where they have been the same.
No, I haven't either.
But so in that scenario, you've been injured, you sought medical treatment, you got it, and for whatever reason, you hire an attorney. And you want to litigate against the insurance company. Your attorney is going to take that amount that was billed, and that's what they're going to ask a judge or a jury
I see.
to compensate you for.
Okay.
Not the amount that the actual insurance, your medical healthcare, insurance company paid.
Okay. I got
So
it.
you're getting it, and some people like to refer to it as a phantom damage.
Okay.
This was paid, this was billed. You get to collect the difference there.
Okay.
That's more than.
Yeah,
So it drives up the cost of the claim.
I get it.
And again, this is, insurance is about making you whole. If you're out of pocket for $1,000,
Yeah.
then you should receive
So
$1,000.
that's more than whole the way
It's more than
yeah,
whole.
what you're talking about.
Correct.
Yeah.
And again, all we're trying to do is rebalance. Louisiana has a serious problem with that. Other states have managed to deal with this and help reduce the insurance premiums for their citizens on their auto and commercial. Commercial trucking is another one, and the dollars there are much higher than they are for
Sure.
for you and I on our personal auto.
Sure.
But the issue is still the same.
What other state would be close to Louisiana in terms of the way they do that thing?
Because it's legal. I mean, there's so many different nuances.
Yeah.
I wish I could say if we just emulated, pick a state.
Yeah.
Alabama.
Okay.
I wish I could say if there was just one, but like I said earlier, insurance is complex.
Right.
The legal world is certainly just as, if not more, complex, and it's also I'll call it's hydraulic, meaning if you push here, then you push down here, something goes up here. You pull this lever here, it moves forward over
Right,
there.
right.
So when we're looking at all these changes in Louisiana, what we talk about is trying to get in the mainstream.
Yeah.
Where Louisiana is an outlier, let's try and move to the mainstream on that. Several years ago, jury trial threshold was one that
Yeah.
the legislature passed.
Right.
I think it was somewhere around $50,000 to get, damages had to exceed $50,000 to get a jury trial. The legislature moved that down. I believe it's 15 now.
Okay.
We're still I believe that 15 is still the highest in the nation. 50,000 was the highest in the nation.
Yeah.
We're still highest at 15.
Wow.
But that was one they saw other states. One, direct action, whereas we were one of 3 states that had a direct action statute. We've removed that now.
What does that mean?
Direct action is one where, again, not an attorney,
Gotcha.
so but where you didn't have to file suit against the party that harmed you.
Okay.
So, like for
I see
example,
what you're saying.
you got to, like, you and I get in an accident and it's my fault. You know, you didn't have to sue me. You get to sue my insurance company.
we got you.
So the jury only gets to see the insurance company, not the person they're suing. So
Okay.
we were only one of 3 states that allowed that. So
Yeah,
so
that
that was
doesn't
removed.
seem right, really. I mean,
Well, the intent there is that the judge or jury should know who they're litigating
Right,
against.
yeah.
The insurance company is still going to be behind
Sure,
you if
yeah.
you're guilty. You know, if you're found that it's your fault. But you know, the intent was for the judge and jury to know who who's responsible. So we removed that. I should have a list with me right
that's
now.
okay.
But
Flipping back to that collateral source, I know you and I have talked before. You thought that was a good thing, and you thought it should have passed. The governor chose to veto that. You disagree with that, right?
I did. You know, I issued a press release that I disagreed with that. I mean, it was the first time that, I say the first time, but that collateral source bill had been debated hotly
Yeah.
throughout the process. And there was a lot of input from people all around the table, around a lot of tables, if you will. And it was a bill that you know, I think that it should have been signed. It wasn't. And the governor, for whatever reasons, and he doesn't have to, you know, justify it to me, but he did a 45-minute veto message on it, and viewers can go back and watch and understand why he thought it needed to be vetoed. You know, I want to work with him and see what we can do to bring something that makes sense, but it has to move the needle.
Yeah.
You know, it has to make the conditions better. And I'm just saying, just any legislation that we talk about as a state, we need to make sure that it is truly going to do something, and not just, you know, say we pass this and at the end of the day the consumers don't benefit.
I asked you about Florida, and I think we got sidetracked there.
Yep.
But explain like what Florida is. I mean, obviously Florida, Louisiana, hurricanes, all that stuff.
Yep.
But and they've managed to overcome some of that stuff, right? And that's Louisiana's goal as well.
They have, and look, you know, as we were talking about earlier, and you're right, we got sidetracked there,
Yeah.
which is easy on insurance
Right,
because
yeah.
there's so many rabbit holes you can go down any one. But they had 4 special sessions to rebalance some of their legal in their state. They tackled assignment of benefits, which Louisiana had already tackled. But they did a lot of reform with the support of the governor, their legislature, and, you know, similar to what we had on property reform here. And they're seeing the positive impacts there. Florida, I think at last count, had over 10 new companies that have come back into their market. 10 new companies, not had come back.
Okay.
10 new companies that are now writing business in a very substantial way, meaning hundreds of thousands of policies.
All right.
They have less than, their citizens, they have a Florida citizens, similar to Louisiana citizens. That policy count had gotten to over 1 million. They have now less than, it has now dipped below 1 million in moving in the right direction there. So it's working. People, and for the first time last year, citizens in Florida start to see their rates decrease for the first time in many, many years. Look, and I think Louisiana, look, and I'll tell you, I'm surprised that we're seeing rate filings for a decrease this early in the process.
Oh, yeah,
But I think it shows that the reform that we passed was substantial. And we also did it in conjunction with the industry. You know, when I became commissioner, I started engaging with the reinsurance markets, with the property markets. We were able to sit down with plaintiff attorneys. We sat down with consumer advocacy groups, and we discussed what the problem was and what some of the potential solutions are. And we were able to come together collectively for most of those and agree what needed to be done. And so all that property reform passed is making a difference. And I think that's why it's a more positive impact sooner here in Louisiana.
Is there enough work being done on the auto industry side to attract auto carriers into the state? Or
well, look, I mean,
hopefully,
I hear from the logging industry, which is
I know
which is very important to our state's
and
economy.
they're hit hard. I know they are.
They are hit hard. They pay some astronomical rates on their vehicles. You know, and I hear anywhere from, I've heard as low, and I say low, and it's high when you think about it, as low as $10,000 to $22,000, $25,000, $30,000 for a single truck and trailer.
Wow, that's crazy.
It's beyond crazy.
Yeah.
But it's not because that truck is that dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's because when that vehicle is in a wreck, there's bodily injury and litigation. And I hear, yeah, these are heavy trucks and all that, but we're talking about vehicles where there aren't that kind of damage
Right.
to individuals. Look, we've had testimony at the Capitol where a gentleman came and he said he was driving the vehicle, his right side's view mirror touched the left-hand side view mirror of the vehicle. That was it.
Yeah.
Broke the mirror, $600, I think it was $75,000 paid for bodily injury to that driver.
Wow. That's tough.
And the vehicle's never touched other than their side view mirrors. That's what we're trying to get a hold of.
Yeah.
Like I said, when people have been seriously injured, they deserve, all the compensation that they're due.
Sure.
We're trying to hit this frivolous and excessive litigation. That is the problem. That is the issue in our state.
That just seems wrong. I don't understand how that happens.
Well, the laws allow it.
Yeah, that is crazy.
And that's what we're trying to modify.
So there's got to be some changes in the laws.
And we're working on that.
Yeah, I know you are. Talk to me about and one of the things I heard about, that might even been before you came onto the scene, but the 3-year rule. And I know that I think Gabe Furman
Yes, sir.
had a piece of legislation that did away with the 3-year rule.
Yeah, so Chairman Furman, he's chair of House Insurance Committee, was the author of that bill, and that is one where, again, when I became commissioner, and it is one that it's been in place since I think 1992. But when I became commissioner, engaging with the reinsurance markets and insurance markets, primary carriers, that was one of the things that they said was the biggest hindrance to doing business, but also to managing their portfolios if they were already writing policies in the state of Louisiana. And quite simply, the law says that after a property company had renewed your homeowner's insurance for 3 years in a row, that they could not non-renew you. They had to offer you, they had to continue to do business with you. They could cancel your policy if you failed to pay your premium or if there was some material change in risk. But for the most part, they were, the former commissioner used to say they were wedded.
Wedded? Yeah.
They were wedded.
Like married.
They were married.
Not wet.
They were wedded. They were married. And there was no divorce.
Yeah.
And we were the only state in America that had this law. But beyond that, we were the only jurisdiction in the world that had this. And it just made it difficult for insurance companies to say, I want to go put my capital at risk in that state, but after 3 years, the state tells me who I have to do business, that I have to keep doing business. That's not free market.
No.
And so I asked the legislature to change that. And so now, as of today, and starting August 1st of last year, any new homeowners policy is not subject to the 3-year law. And companies, so there's still a lot of companies out there that have these portfolios of, and let's just say yours is one of them. The legislation also allows companies to non-renew up to 5% of those policies that are still subject to that. So we went with a very low number, 5%, so that they, and the intent was so that a company just can't come in and say, we want to get rid of all, all of the policies we have in 1 year. That would not be in the best interest of the consumer. So we put some protections in there so that it will slowly allow companies to get off the policies that they don't want to be on. And look, at the end of the day, and it sounds counterintuitive, you want to be doing business with a company that wants to do business with you.
Sure.
And so I think at the end of the day, and look, there'll certainly be some people that don't want to lose that think that they want to stay with the company or where they're with. But in the long run, this is going to help promote competition. And again, competition is the best consumer protection. When you have choice, then that's the consumer protection that we all want to have.
We got like a minute or so left. I want to hit you with, you mentioned the reinsurance markets, and I know you've made several trips overseas to talk to like Lloyd's of London and reinsurers like that, and they're getting a better picture of Louisiana now, right? They're more positive.
Look, I've been working on the relationships with the reinsurance markets, and the reinsurance market is still very relationship driven. They still got to make sure the math works, but it is heavily dependent on relationships. And I used to be a reinsurance broker. I'm very familiar with those markets, and one of the things I did, was outreach to them to say, what do we need to do to help make Louisiana more attractive for insurance companies and reinsurance companies to want to deploy their capital here. You know, like I said, you know, I read the headlines just like you and all your viewers and listeners, and you know, Louisiana is moving the needle when it comes to encouraging companies to come and do business here. We've seen the headlines recently with Meta and with Hyundai,
right.
and you know, there's LNG growth going on, you know, in South Louisiana. We're doing all these things to promote business and industry in Louisiana. We need to make sure insurance is one of those, because we cannot function without it.
No, they got to have it. Hey, I could talk to you for another hour, but
We'll do this again.
we'll do it again. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Absolutely. Tim Temple, the insurance commissioner for the state of Louisiana. It may not be the most exciting topic, but it's probably the most necessary topic, right?
It's certainly necessary.
All right. Enjoy this edition of the app, ARKLATEX People in Politics. We'll see you next time. Have a good one.